Hey everyone, welcome back to our channel. I hope you're all doing well. Today, we've got a fascinating story lined up for you about a group of nuns who encounter a mysterious curse at their convent. It's a tale of faith, courage, and the strength of community. So, grab your favorite snack, settle into your coziest spot, and get ready to be captivated. Let's dive right in and uncover the events that unfolded at St. Cecilia's Convent. If you've enjoyed our stories so far, please hit that subscribe button and give us a like. And don't forget to comment below if you're subscribed and let us know what kind of story you'd like to hear next time. Your support and feedback help our family grow together, and we love hearing from you. The Forgotten Photograph. In the quiet town of Marbury, life moved at a leisurely pace. Its streets lined with Victorian-era houses and a single main road that connected the town to the rest of the world. It was a place where everyone knew everyone, and nothing extraordinary ever happened, or so it seemed. Mrs. Eleanor Smythe, a widow in her late 60s, had lived in Marbury all her life. Her house, a charming relic of the 19th century, was filled with memories. Every piece of furniture, every photograph on the wall, carried a story from her past. But there was one photograph, tucked away in the attic, that she had forgotten entirely. One sunny afternoon, with nothing better to do, Eleanor decided to clean out her attic. It was a task she had been putting off for years. She climbed the narrow stairs, the wood creaking under her weight, and pushed open the dusty door. Sunlight streamed through a small window, casting eerie shadows among the forgotten relics of her past. As she sifted through old boxes, she stumbled upon a wooden chest she didn't remember owning. It was locked, but the key was still in the keyhole. Curious, Eleanor turned the key, and the lock clicked open. Inside, she found an assortment of items: an old pocket watch, some yellowed letters, and at the bottom, a photograph she did not recall ever seeing. The photograph was of a young girl, no more than 10 years old, standing in front of Eleanor's house. The girl's eyes were strikingly familiar, and her smile seemed to hide a secret. But what unnerved Eleanor was not the girl's expression. It was the fact that she could not remember the girl at all. There were no dates, names, or any other identifying marks on the photograph. Eleanor took the photograph downstairs, intending to ask her neighbor, Mrs. Henson, if she recognized the girl. Mrs. Henson was the town's unofficial historian, having lived in Marbury her entire life and knowing more about its residents than anyone else. "Oh, Eleanor, come in, Mrs. Henson greeted her warmly. Eleanor showed her the photograph, and Mrs. Henson's face paled. She stared at the image for a long moment, then handed it back with a trembling hand. "Where did you find this?" Mrs. Henson asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "In my attic," Eleanor replied. "Do you know who she is?" Mrs. Henson took a deep breath. "That's Elizabeth Turner. She lived in your house." "Oh, it must be 50 years ago now. She disappeared one day, without a trace. The whole town searched for her, but she was never found." A chill ran down Eleanor's spine. How could she have lived in the same house for so many years and never heard of this? She thanked Mrs. Henson and returned home, the photograph feeling heavier in her hand than it had before. That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, the photograph on her bedside table, her mind racing with thoughts of the girl. She tried to remember any stories or whispers about Elizabeth Turner, but came up blank. As she lay there, she heard a faint sound, like someone humming a tune. She sat up, straining her ears. The sound was coming from the attic. Gathering her courage, Eleanor took a flashlight and climbed the stairs. The humming grew louder with each step. She pushed open the attic door, and the humming stopped abruptly. Eleanor scanned the attic with her flashlight. Everything was as she had left it earlier, except for one thing. The photograph was now lying on top of the wooden chest, though she was certain she had taken it downstairs. A sudden, inexplicable coldness enveloped her. She picked up the photograph and, in the dim light of her flashlight, noticed something she hadn't seen before. A small, shadowy figure in the background, barely visible among the trees. It looked like another child, watching Elizabeth from a distance. Heart-pounding, Eleanor backed out of the attic and closed the door. She decided she would take the photograph to the town library the next day and see if she could find any more information about Elizabeth Turner and the shadowy figure. The next morning, Eleanor visited the library. She scoured old newspapers and town records, but there was no mention of Elizabeth's disappearance. It was as if the town had collectively decided to forget her. However, she did find an old diary belonging to a girl named Margaret Thompson, a contemporary of Elizabeth's. Margaret's last diary entry, dated the day Elizabeth disappeared, sent shivers down Eleanor's spine. Elizabeth said she saw a girl in the woods today, a girl who looked just like her. She was scared and said the girl wanted to take her place. I told her it was just her imagination, but now I'm not so sure. Elizabeth is gone, and I'm afraid. What if the girl comes for me next? Eleanor closed the diary, her hands shaking. The shadowy figure in the photograph was no ordinary child. She was something else, something that had been lurking in the shadows for decades. Returning home, Eleanor felt a sense of urgency. She climbed the stairs to the attic once more. As she entered, she heard the humming again, clearer this time. The photograph lay on the chest, and next to it, a small, antique mirror she hadn't noticed before. She picked up the mirror, and her reflection stared back at her. But it wasn't just her reflection. Behind her, in the dim attic, she saw the faint outline of a young girl with a sinister smile. Eleanor dropped the mirror, and it shattered, the humming stopping abruptly. The attic grew cold, and the photograph fluttered to the floor, face down. On its back, written in an old-fashioned script, were the words, "She is waiting." Eleanor realized that some mysteries are better left unsolved. She locked the attic door, hoping to forget what she had seen. But deep down, she knew that the girl in the photograph and shadowy figure would remain a part of her house's history, waiting for the next unsuspecting resident to uncover their eerie secret. The Haunted Heirloom. In the serene village of Willowbrook, nestled in the rolling hills of the countryside, life was simple and unassuming. The villagers went about their daily routines, and the passage of time was marked by the changing seasons rather than by the ticking of a clock. Among the villagers was Clara, a young woman who had recently inherited her late grandmother's house. Clara's grandmother, Edith, had been a beloved figure in Willowbrook, known for her wisdom and her collection of rare antiques. When Clara moved into the old house, she felt a mix of nostalgia and trepidation. The house was filled with memories of her childhood, but it also held many secrets, some of which Edith had hinted at, but never fully revealed. One rainy afternoon, as Clara explored the attic, she discovered a beautifully crafted wooden box. It was intricately carved with patterns that seemed almost to move as the light shifted. Clara had never seen the box before, and she wondered why her grandmother had kept it hidden away. She brought the box downstairs and set it on the kitchen table. There was no lock, only a simple latch. As she opened the lid, a musty smell wafted out, and she found a small mirror and an old, leather-bound journal inside. The mirror was tarnished, but its ornate frame suggested it was a valuable antique. The journal's pages were yellowed with age, and Clara's curiosity was piqued. She began reading the journal, discovering it was her grandmother's. The entries described everyday life, but as Clara read further, she found a passage that made her pause. June 12th, 1956. Today, I found a peculiar mirror at the market. The seller warned me it was an old soul, but I couldn't resist its beauty. Since bringing it home, I've had the strangest sensation of being watched. I must investigate further. Clara glanced at the mirror on the table. It seemed innocent enough, but her grandmother's words lingered in her mind. She continued reading, and the entries grew increasingly unsettling. Edith described how she felt compelled to look into the mirror, losing track of time whenever she did. She wrote about vivid dreams and a sense of a presence that seemed to emanate from the mirror. July 20th, 1956. The mirror's hold on me is growing stronger. I see glimpses of another life, another place, when I look into it. I must be cautious. I feel it changing me, influencing my thoughts. I can't let it take control. Clara's heart raced as she read the final entry. August 2nd, 1956. I must hide the mirror. It is too dangerous. I feel its power over me waning as I distance myself from it. I pray that no one else will fall under its spell. Clara looked at the mirror again, her curiosity battling with a growing sense of dread. She decided to test her grandmother's claims. She picked up the mirror, its surface cool and smooth, and gazed into it. At first, she saw only her reflection, slightly distorted by the tarnish. But as she continued to stare, the room around her seemed to fade away. The mirror's surface rippled, and Clara felt as if she were being pulled into it. Her surroundings blurred, and she found herself standing in a different place, a grand ballroom filled with elegantly dressed people. The scene was vivid, almost real. She could hear the faint strains of music and the murmur of conversation. She looked down and saw she was wearing a beautiful gown, her hands adorned with delicate gloves. Panic surged through her, but she couldn't look away from the mirror. A man approached her, his face familiar yet unrecognizable. He took her hand and led her into a dance. Clara's mind screamed for her to stop, to break free, but her body moved of its own accord. The man whispered something in her ear, words that she couldn't understand, but that filled her with a deep sense of foreboding. Suddenly, the scene shifted, and Clara was back in her kitchen, the mirror still in her hands. She was breathing heavily, her heart pounding. She set the mirror down, trembling. The experience had felt too real, too tangible to be a mere hallucination. Determined to understand what was happening, Clara continued reading the journal. Edith had discovered that the mirror was an ancient artifact, once owned by a powerful enchantress who had imbued it with a fragment of her own soul. The mirror could transport its holder into the enchantress's memories, trapping them in a loop of her experiences. Clara realized that the mirror wasn't haunted by a ghost, but possessed by the essence of the enchantress. It was not a malevolent spirit, but a relic of a life long past, seeking to preserve its history by ensnaring those who looked into it. She knew she had to rid herself of the mirror. Following her grandmother's example, she wrapped it in a cloth and placed it back in the wooden box. She took the box to the edge of the village, where an old well stood, hidden by overgrown weeds. With a sense of finality, Clara dropped the box into the well, hearing it splash far below. She hoped that by returning it to the earth, she was freeing herself and future generations from its influence. As Clara walked back to the house, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The rain had stopped, and the sun was breaking through the clouds. She knew she had done the right thing, honoring her grandmother's wish to keep the mirror's power contained. Life in Willowbrook returned to its peaceful rhythm, and Clara made new memories in her grandmother's house, memories untainted by the haunted heirloom. She never spoke of the mirror again, and over time, the strange encounter faded into the recesses of her mind, becoming just another story from the past, buried and forgotten. The possession at St. Cecilia's. St. Cecilia's convent had stood on the outskirts of a small, remote village for over 2 centuries. The convent, with its grand Gothic architecture and peaceful gardens, had been a sanctuary for many devout women. The nuns who lived there dedicated their lives to prayer, service, and the maintenance of the old church, which was the heart of the convent. Sister Agnes, the prioress, had been at St. Cecilia's for over 30 years. She was a woman of strong faith and gentle demeanor, loved by all the sisters. Her closest companions were Sister Margaret, Sister Lucia, and Sister Anne, who had each taken their vows at different times, but had grown close over their shared devotion and duties. One autumn evening, as the nuns gathered for vespers in the dimly lit chapel, a storm brewed outside. The wind howled through the old stone walls, and the candles flickered ominously. Sister Agnes led the prayers, her voice steady and calm, but there was an uneasy feeling in the air. After vespers, Sister Margaret approached Sister Agnes with a concerned look. "Mother Prioress, I've been feeling a strange presence these past few nights. I can't explain it, but it feels dark." Sister Agnes frowned, but nodded. "I have felt it too. We must remain vigilant and pray for protection." That night, the storm intensified, and the nuns retired to their cells with heavy hearts. As Sister Lucia knelt by her bed, reciting her nightly prayers, she heard a faint whisper, almost inaudible over the howling wind. She paused, straining to hear, but it was gone. Shaking her head, she continued her prayers, attributing the sound to her imagination. In the middle of the night, Sister Anne awoke with a start. Her room was ice cold, and she could see her breath forming in the air. She glanced at the crucifix on the wall, which seemed to be shrouded in shadow. A deep, guttural voice echoed in her mind. "You are not alone." Terrified, she rushed to Sister Agnes's cell. "Mother Prioress, something is here," she whispered, her voice trembling. Sister Agnes rose from her bed, her face pale but resolute. "We must gather the others and pray." The nuns assembled in the chapel, their candles casting long shadows on the walls. They knelt in a circle, reciting prayers of protection As they prayed, the air grew thicker, and an oppressive silence fell over them. Suddenly, the chapel doors slammed shut, and the candles extinguished, plunging them into darkness. A sinister laughter echoed through the chapel, sending chills down their spines. Sister Agnes, her voice strong, began an exorcism prayer, calling upon the power of God to banish the evil presence. The other nuns joined her, their voices wavering but united. The laughter grew louder, and the temperature plummeted further. Sister Margaret felt an invisible force grip her throat, choking her words. She gasped for air, her eyes wide with terror. Sister Lucia, beside her, felt her own body freezing, her limbs refusing to move. Sister Anne, clutching her rosary, cried out, "In the name of Jesus Christ, leave this place." The laughter ceased abruptly, and for a moment there was a deafening silence. Then, a powerful gust of wind blew through the chapel, knocking the nuns to the floor. The candles were lit, their flames flickering wildly. Sister Agnes struggled to her feet, her eyes scanning the room for any sign of the presence. She could feel it lurking, waiting. "We must strengthen our prayers," she said, helping the others to stand. For the next few days, the nuns experienced a series of disturbing events. Objects moved on their own. Disembodied voices whispered in their ears, and dark shadows flitted through the hallways. Despite their fear, they continued their prayers, determined to protect their sacred home. One evening, as they gathered in the chapel, a violent tremor shook the building. The altar cloth flew off, and the crucifix above the altar turned upside down. Sister Agnes, realizing the severity of their situation, knew they needed help. "We must contact Father Benedict," she said. "He has experience with these matters." Father Benedict was a seasoned exorcist who had dealt with many cases of possession and hauntings. He arrived at the convent the following day, a stern yet compassionate man, carrying a worn leather bag filled with holy relics and texts. As he entered the chapel, he could feel the malevolent energy permeating the air. "Sister Agnes, tell me everything," he said, setting down his bag. Sister Agnes recounted the events of the past week, her voice steady, but filled with concern. Father Benedict listened intently, nodding occasionally. When she finished, he took a deep breath. "This is a powerful entity, one that feeds on fear and despair. We must confront it directly." That night, Father Benedict and the nuns gathered in the chapel for the exorcism. The storm had returned, and thunder rumbled ominously overhead. Father Benedict began the ritual, his voice strong and commanding as he recited the prayers of exorcism. As he prayed, the entity made its presence known. The air grew heavy, and the candles flickered wildly. Dark shadows swirled around the room, and the sinister laughter returned, louder and more menacing. Father Benedict raised his crucifix, his voice unwavering. "In the name of Jesus Christ, I command you to reveal yourself." The shadows coalesced into a dark, amorphous figure at the center of the chapel. The nuns gasped in unison, clutching their rosaries tightly. The figure spoke, its voice a cacophony of whispers. "You cannot banish me. This place is mine." Father Benedict stepped forward, his eyes locked on the entity. "You have no power here. By the authority of Christ, I command you to leave these holy grounds." The entity shrieked, a sound that reverberated through the very walls of the convent. The ground trembled, and the crucifix above the altar glowed with a brilliant light. The nuns joined their voices with Father Benedict's, their prayers forming a protective shield around them. The entity writhed and twisted, its form growing more distorted as it struggled against the holy power. With one final, ear-piercing scream, it dissolved into a cloud of dark smoke, which dissipated into nothingness. The chapel fell silent, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. The nuns, though exhausted, felt a profound sense of relief. Father Benedict lowered his crucifix, a look of satisfaction on his face. "It is over," he said, his voice calm. "The entity is gone." The nuns gathered around him, tears of gratitude in their eyes. Sister Agnes stepped forward, her hands clasped in thanks. "Father Benedict, we are forever grateful. You have saved our home." He smiled gently. "It is not I who saved you, but your faith and strength. Remember that you are never alone in your struggles." The days that followed were filled with a renewed sense of peace and devotion at St. Cecilia's convent. The nuns resumed their routines, but with a deeper understanding of the power of their faith. They maintained a constant vigil of prayer, ensuring that their sanctuary remained protected. Sister Agnes often reflected on the events that had transpired, her heart filled with gratitude for Father Benedict's intervention and the unwavering faith of her sisters. They had faced a great darkness and emerged stronger, their bond fortified by their shared ordeal. Years later, the story of the possession at St. Cecilia's became a tale of resilience and faith, passed down through generations. The convent continued to stand as a beacon of hope and devotion, its history a testament to the power of unity and the enduring light of faith in the face of darkness. Thank you, everyone, for joining me until the end of this story. Your support and engagement mean the world to me. Thank you for your likes and subscriptions, and for being a part of our growing family. Together, we share in these tales and create lasting memories. I look forward to more adventures with you all.